Good morning, dear friends. Afreilich and Hanukkah. Today is the 5th day of Hanukkah, the 29th of Kislev. I'm in denial here. December 3rd. December 3rd. In the Hasidic tradition and beyond, the 5th light of Hanukkah is a special day. But first, I should say why we're here. We're gathered here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. At the moment, we are studying Masechah Shabbos. Perek HaMatzniah, that's the 10th chapter. We are doing fantastic. We are well deep into Masechah Shabbos. We've covered so many topics, and presently we're talking about carrying. We had a Mishnah that went through some elementary but very fundamental aspects of carrying on Shabbos. What's considered prohibited carrying? Deoraita, are there other kinds of carryings that are patur? They're not biblical in nature. And of course, we even discovered that some items that are in theory permissible could also be problematic, which is why, generally speaking, you want to be very mindful about carrying on Shabbos. But first, I just want to mention the Finif Lichtel, the 5th night of Hanukkah, is a special night in the Hasidic tradition. In some traditions, including the Chabad, I don't know if, today, many kids know that Hanukkah, they get a present every night of Hanukkah. I'm not saying that you should do that or shouldn't do that, but one of the, and it's it became a little bit of a competition with the other, gifting season. And there's no criticism. We should make Jewish holidays and Jewish seasons as joyous and meaningful for kids. That's important. But not everyone gave their kids presents or Hanukkah gelt every night of Hanukkah. So I believe in the Russian Chabad impoverished tradition, they would give Hanukkah gelt the 5th night of Hanukkah. And there was mystical significance, but the main idea was that you have a menorah of 8 candles. So when you get to 4, you're halfway through, but 5 means you're over the hump. The 5th day means we have more light than vacuum, because there's 8 potential candles. The 5th night means most of the menorah is lit. So it represents a certain degree of optimism that we're on our way. Now, conversely, sometimes that could evoke emotions of sadness, but we don't want Hanukkah to end. You want Hanukkah to end so fast? Only 8 days, a special time, a special message. Jewish people of all degrees of background feel alive and feel validated and seen. And so, but that's what the 5th night of Hanukkah is. So there's some special value, more light than dark, more light than vacuum. And I just want to say, although this is not really, you don't need to be a major rabbi to say this, but I was thinking about what would be a message for Hanukkah this year. And we've been doing outdoor menorah lightings in different condos that would allow, and people, all of us, we've been through a lot, and it's a lot of plans that we, simchas and other kinds of plans, so much, and just life has been so altered. And so what could be an uplifting message that appropriately acknowledges the reality, which is it's been a rough haul. So what I thought is that the difference between a dark room and a light room is not much at all. You can have the room exactly the same, but in a dark room, you can't see it, you can't appreciate it. And so dark, then you flip the switch. The only thing that changes is that you're able to see the stuff that's already there. When it's dark, you can trip, and you could, you can't appreciate it. Lights are turned on, you can appreciate it. And so I was thinking that there's a lot that's not good. But the idea of Hanukkah, the idea of turning on the lights, is to allow for a moment to hold the torch over the positive and over the blessings that are in a dark world. And so that doesn't always change. It doesn't always change reality, but it allows us to add into perspective the blessings that sometimes are overlooked. And that's the idea, I guess, of putting on a candle or lighting multiple candles to try within the dark, within the gloom, within legitimate difficulty to find the brachas that are there. And that can only be done by turning on a light and flipping a switch in our minds to try to look for those things. And so that was the universal message. In addition to the Dvar Torah, that was the universal message of Hanukkah. Easier said than done, but it resonated with me myself. And so, yes.
Rabbi, you could make a drosha the other way around. Maybe with all the terrible things going on, let's turn off the switch for a few minutes.
We don't want to see it.
About the Narishkeit.
That is a fair point. That is a fair point. Also, my point was we're standing outside in a dark pool deck, or a darker pool deck than usual, but we turn on the menorah and we get a chance to see each other. We see the blessings, and we remind ourselves that we feel alone, and we can feel alone, but we're not alone. And Let's share the screen. Let's start some Gemara. So yesterday we read a Mishnah, the Mishnah that was preempted by our dear Reb Allen, who I don't think he's on here, but we should acknowledge he asked a good question. What if you carried in an atypical manner? And so the Mishnah basically lays out clearly, carrying in your hands, either hand, in your pocket, on your shoulder, you're chayiv. The Mishnah says that's what the cost did. And then we talked about ways that you're not chayiv. The backhanded or differently with your foot, with your mouth, in your not properly arranged belt, your ear, your hair, in certain gaps in your clothing, in the seam of your clothing, in your shoes, in other footwear. All of those things are not considered conventional methods of carrying. Rebbe pointed out correctly so, that in the event that these were to become a typical way of carrying something, it does become considered carrying, and our Gemara is going to provide further evidence to that idea, I believe. Amar Rabbi Lazar. So now the Gemara is going to want to figure out what's this deal with the Bnei Kahas. And to help us with this, I brought out here an Art Scroll Gemara as well. So let's see between Rabbi Steinsaltz and the Art Scroll. Let's see if we can. It's not a hard Gemara. It just has some equations that Mark usually helps me out, but I don't want to abuse you too much. Here we go. Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar taught. Hamoitzi masoi. If you're carrying a load, l'maylo me'asara tvachim, that's higher than 10 handbreadths from the ground. Meaning, you're in a public domain, but it's not close to the ground. It's heightened. It's elevated. Chayav, Rabbi Lazar teaches, you are also liable, or I shouldn't say you're also liable. You are liable as well as other scenarios that we said you're liable. Shekein masa b'nei kas. And the reason why we know you are liable for carrying in such a manner is this is considered carrying, and that's how the sons of Kahas carried. Rashi. Maviroi be'avir b'yadai. He's carrying it in the air with his hand. Ve'enoi al ksefoi. It's not resting on his shoulders. Ve'gevoya min haaretz asara. And it also is 10 tefachim off the ground. That's what we're talking about. If it's on your shoulder, masnisani. The Mishnah already explicitly teaches us that it is considered carrying. There's a teaching that we're going to read shortly that says if you throw something 4 amis across a wall, whose phone is it? Oh, okay. Here is a teaching which tells us that the wall or the item that's elevated 10 tefachim up is not a public domain. To throw something in the air on a high height, whatever we'll get into later on in the Gemara, that's carrying. But if it's in your hand, just because it's elevated above the ground, 10 tefachim, which is not that high, you're chayiv diyalef mibnei kahas b'mishkan. And indeed, the confirmation from this or for this is from the sons of Kahas. So again, if it's normally in your hands, or it's normally in your pocket, or it's on your shoulder, it's obviously you're a chayiv. You're carrying it in a way that's in the air, so it's high above the ground. It's not resting. Maybe you should be potter. Maybe you should be exempt. No, you're chayiv because this is a reflection of how the sons of Kahas carried. So the Gemara says, hold on, time out. Let's figure this out. How do we know exactly, or how do we know that the sons of Kahas carried items suspended in the air 10 tefachim or more? How do I know that the sons of Kahas carried it in this manner? We have a verse, that describes the Kahas family carrying syndicate. No. Ala Mishkan, the Al Mizbeach Saviv. That the items, the curtains particularly, Rashi, Bekali HaChatzer Mishkan. We're talking about the curtains of the Mishkan. And it says that they were on the Mishkan, Ba'ala Mizbeach Saviv, and around the Mizbeach. So what's relevant here is Makish Mizbeach LeMishkan. We have in one verse, Mishkan and Mizbeach next to one another. And there is an intention here to convey common facts, common halachic facts between Mishkan and Mizbeach? What possible common facts? What might be in common between Mishkan and Mizbeach? So here he says, Ma Mishkan Eser Amos. The Mishkan had planks that were 10 amos high. Af Mizbeach Eser Amos, so too the altar was 10 amos high. So again, to remember that the Mishkan of the desert was an open air. At least the chutzner was open air, and it had a wall planks that created its wall structure that were 10 amos high. And so the Mizbeach also is 10 amos high, says the Gemara. We're in the middle of a thought process. We want to know, ultimately, our intention here is going to be to prove that the sons of Kahas carry stuff suspended in the air 10 tefachim. In order to do that, we're identifying stuff that the sons of Kahas carry. We're figuring out their height. And then we're gonna figure out. Sorry, one second. Then we're going to figure out exactly how high these items that the sons of Kahas carried were suspended. Rashi, Af Mizbeach. Goiva Yod Amos, the Mizbeach was 10 Amos. V'hutzrach l'soivavoy b'kloyim shel Yod Amos. And it needed to be surrounded by curtains, draperies that were 10 Amos. Rachav, Umani Mekayim v'gimel Amos kamasai. So why does the Pasuk say that the Mizbeach was 3 Amot if the Mizbeach was really 10 Amos? So the Gemara answers, Misvas Soiviv Ulamaila. The Mizbeach, as you may know, had a line running across the middle of it. And there to the top was 10 Amos. Umani Mekayim v'koyim Yud, the Kloyim. And what does it mean that it was 5 high? Misvas HaMizbeach Ulamaila, we're talking about measuring from another specific point of the Mizbeach. Kach Mefurish Mizvachim She'kloyim Tesav Amos. Okay, I'm sorry, I misread that. Then why does it say that the Kloim were 5 Amos? Because in truth, the Kloim were actually 15 Amos high. They went an additional 10 Amos above the Mizbeach. So long story short, the long story short is we can infer from our Gemara infers that the Mizbeach was 10 Tfachim and 10 Amos. We have some more facts in Rashi, which is the Mizbeach was 10 Amos. Although there are other texts that assert it was a whole lot shorter, that's talking about a specific segment of the Mizbeach. And what about the curtains? We said there were 10, but elsewhere we say they were 15. So our answer is 10 means the height that was needed up to the Mizbeach to cover it. So the 5 means that it was extended 5 Amos higher than the curtains. But what we need to know right now is Mizbeach 10 Amos tall, which, by the way, that's quite tall if you ask me. But get ready, because the Mizbeach wasn't the only thing that was tall. So the Gemara asks, Mishkan Gufim Minalan, you inferred from the Mishkan that's 10 Amos, that the Mizbeach, you inferred from the tabernacle's height, the height of the Mizbeach. But how do we know the height of the Mishkan? Because the planks were 10 Amos tall. And it says that they spread out the tent, meaning the material that was on top of the inner Azara. I'm sorry, the Kodesh and the Kodesh of Kodesh, right? We know that there was a chutzner, there was a courtyard, and then there was a structure in the middle which housed the Holy and the Holy of Holies. And it says that they spread the curtains on top of the tent on the Mishkan. Oyel al Mishkan. And so from here we see, or here we can infer that the Mishkan was 10 Amos tall, the Mizbeach was 10 Amos tall. Rav taught Moshe. I'm sorry, no, scratch that. I'm sorry, scratch that. Mishkan Gufei Minolan. How do I know that Mishkan was 10 Amos? We have a verse. Whatever I just said from here forward, scratch that. It says that Moshe spread the curtains on top of the Mishkan. It was Moshe who spread it out. Moshe is the one who spread out the curtains on the Mishkan. From here, the Gemara wants to infer that there was a genetic feature that the Levites may have all been 10 Amos tall. This is what Rav teaches. Not everybody agrees, but there's a teaching that says that the Levium were 10 amas tall. Mark, how tall would that make the Levium?
And 10 amas is about 5 meters. So
Which is how many feet?
5 meters is
about
small.
15 feet, I guess.
15 feet?
I can do this. You can use the converter and come up with the exact
So you're saying
number.
we should name our next basketball team the Hallandale Levites. We have some Levium on our doctor, you're muted. But we have
They
some.
say 4.8 meters on this one.
So we're talking about something between 13 to 15 feet tall.
So let's run that through the other converter.
So Dr. Pasternak and I will finally be able to dunk a basketball.
Oh.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
So Moshe and Levium, they have all been very tall.
The
Someone's-
4.8 meters actually comes out to
Give me a
almost
se-
15 3/4 feet, actually. But that's right, 10 meters is 3.3 feet. So yeah, it's a little under 16 feet. It is pretty tall.
So this would be very tall. The interesting thing is there's an understanding here that there may have been strongly varied features between the different shvatim, because there's a presumption that perhaps there's a common height or a feature of a certain kind of height consistent among the Levium. And in general, I don't want to go too far into this, but it is an interesting assertion. In general, we find that the different shvatim had different strengths that are described both in the blessings and also which industries they were in. So it's just interesting to consider, at least an opinion in the Gemara that says that the Levium would have all been a very significant height. The Gemara is not, hold on, the Gemara, one second. The Gemara is going to move from this. So that's why I'm only being tentative here. But at this point, the Gemara is assuming that all the Levium are the same, which means there's a plausibility that there were common features. Certain tribes maybe have been taller or shorter. Maybe other tribes had certain appearances or accents, which we find from later on in Tanakh, that there were certain common features. And I think, again, I don't know a lot about genetics, but it's not implausible if there was a lot of in-marriage between specific tribes. It's not implausible that certain features would be highlighted, not unlike the unfortunate and fortunate fact that Jews tend to have certain strengths by virtue of common bottleneck aspects of our genetics. And we also tend to have certain common diseases, which is why geneticists love Ashkenazim. And many geneticists are actually Ashkenazic Jews who got involved in it because they saw firsthand the need of it. So it's interesting to see such a concept, I think, in the Gemara. But let's see the Gemara's. So
I don't understand how Rav can even learn this. I mean, he learns this from Moshe Rabbeinu Pashov, which means that Moshe spread the tent over the Mishkan.
Without a ladder. That's what we're saying.
Fine, I understand that. So, okay, so you can say that Moshe Rabbeinu was 10 feet tall, but not infer from that all the Levium was 10 feet tall.
Well, at this point, the Gemara makes that inference, my suggestion was perhaps there is a concept of common features between the tribes. So if Moshe is uniquely tall, probably the tribe of the Levium were extra tall individuals. The Gemara is not going to stay with that forever, but here's the idea in the Gemara, a havamina, a question or a presumption, even if it's ultimately rejected, brings value or is worthy of consideration. Where are they coming from? And so that's my that's my irreverent understanding of where that may be coming from. From here, you can infer that the Levium generally were on the taller side. Okay, now let's get into the math. Ugimiri, we have a rule. We have a general principle. The chaltuna, the midli b'motot, when you carry something with poles, tilta mila'el, utre tilte milatachat. You usually carry it in such a manner where the poles are positioned or the item is carried 1/3 on top, 2/3 below. Rashi, tilta mila'el, 1/3 above, Kivan the Mizbeach Yud Amas, being that the Mizbeach is 10 Amas tall. Nope. Vihu Noise Bekosef, and it's carried on a shoulder. Kidich Sev, Livnei Kahasli Nasan Al Galais, Valavim Aser Amas. Ki Midulei, when they carried it with poles, Tilsa Lamaila Mirashehem, 1/3 was above their head, or at least 1/3 was above their shoulders. Nimsa Gavoya Min Aretz, Karev Lishlish. It turns out that, let's think about this, if the Levim are 10 amas tall, and the item they're carrying is 10 amas tall, and the item they're carrying pops above their heads, or at least above their shoulders, 1/3 of the height, their own height. So then you have the items that the Levim are carrying significantly above 10 tfachim. Our whole question was 10 tfachim. We generally say, and I should have maybe clarified this before, 10 tfachim potentially creates a new space, and so we might think that 10 tfachim above the ground isn't really rishus harabim if it's suspended. And so the chiddush of our Gemara is that when the Levim carried something on their shoulders, it was suspended in the air. I'm sorry, not on their shoulders, with poles. It was suspended well above 10 tfachim. Actually, several.
Anything on your shoulder would be 10 tefachim up for sure.
What?
Anything carried on the shoulder would be more than 10 tefachim off the ground.
Correct. But we're trying to use some mathematic precision here to identify, or at least be certain, that these were well above the air, and that's what the Gemara here is saying. So ishtakach to have a midlei tuva. It means that they were hanging off the ground, they were dangling a considerable amount above 10 tefachim, and therefore, if you carry something in the air, even though it's 10 tefachim above the ground, it is still considered carrying.
Otherwise, almost anything you carry is going to be 10 tefachim unless it's dragging on the ground.
Correct. As a matter of fact, 3.5 amos, which is approximately 1/3, or 3.3 rather.
That's about an average height for a person, I guess, a normal person.
Yeah.
About.
So 3.3 converts to approximately 20 tvachim, which is a good bit more than 10 tvachim above the ground. Now is going to come Rebbe Menachem's. I have your permission to not call you doctor, right? Rebbe Menachem.
Absolutely.
So now comes.
Reb is an upgrade. Come on.
You know what's funny? I reached out to a few friends recently. I was thanking them for certain things that they did. You'll never guess what. And so they didn't answer the phone. So I left them a message saying, Reb, whatever, thank you so much. And so a few of them saying, wow, you call me Reb. This is not acceptable. I'm not used to being called Reb. I'm just a simple person. So I said, what do you think Reb means? Not kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, Reb, they seem to be Reb of Rav.
No, but actually, I'll tell you what, in Chabad, I'll tell you actually why my friends who are Chabadniks were disturbed by the title Reb. Because in Chabad, the big people were known as, so let's say there was a big chassid called Pinya Korf. He passed away this year in COVID, among many others. And so he was known as Reb Pinya. There was and he was a giant of a chassid. And Reb Yoel Khan, who was the Rebbe's choser, he was the person who would dictate all of the Rebbe's teachings. He would essentially commit them to memory and then transcribe them. He was known as Reb Yoel. So Reb, although in theory it just means Mister, but in the Chabad tradition it means a whole lot more than that. It means a very endearing and so friends of my age didn't like them calling Reb. You're Reb Yoel, you could call Reb Yoel, but to call me Reb. All right, let's see the Gemara's. So let's see Reb Menachem's perspective addressed at least in part. V'boy Yisema. Alternatively, we could say, let's get Rashi in the Iboy Yisema, Rashi. Loi Givihi Leviim. The Leviim weren't super tall. So this is Reb Menachem's understanding. V'lavim Mizbeach Karinan. And it's not a mathematical equation based on the height of the Mizbeach. The Shema Leviim Loi Givihi Ela Zayin Amis. It's plausible that the Leviim were not 10 amas tall. They were only 7 amas tall. Mark, help us out. What is 7 amas tall? Still a good height. Still higher than your average basketball player.
Yeah. Yes, that's almost 12. That's
12?
11, 12 feet. Yeah.
So it's also a considerable height, but it's not 15, 16 feet tall. And maybe the Mizbeach was really only elevated off the ground 3 or 4 tefachim. Why? Because now what needs to happen is we're going to subtract the shortness of the Levium's height from 10 to 7 or whatever, and all of a sudden now the Mizbeach slumps down relative to their height by that very same adjustment, right? And so now instead of 20 tfachim off the ground, they are plausibly just 2 or 3 tfachim. Parenthetically, Rabbi Nachum, you're wondering, why don't we just say that the Levium were normal height? Why don't we just say that they were 4 tfachim or 3 tfachim high? 3 tfachim. Probably.
All I know in the Chumash, when the Meraglim go into Israel, they come back and they say, well, the Nephilim, the giants there. So if you're talking about all the Levim being 7 amot tall or 10 amot tall,
could you imagine
you worry about a few Nephilim being in Eretz Yisrael?
Or conversely, could you imagine how tall the Nephilim must have been?
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if there are any Levim in the Mishlachat.
But I think there were only 4. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there were only 4 Nephilim. If I'm not mistaken.
But Rabbi Nachum, I want to ask you: were there any Levim among the Mishlachat of the spies?
No.
So maybe
they don't have to.
You're saying if they were used
when they come back and they have to, that's how they're going to scare everybody when you have a whole shevet that's so tall.
Interesting. No, you're right. It is an interesting thing because also you'll say maybe the Jews were scared because the Levim were the tall ones, but they weren't in battle.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Dr. Hammer will tell you that it's perception. If somebody taller, you could come back and say a giant, and you could be talking about someone just 6 feet tall. It's, their perception of what they saw.
And then you have people who met giants of people like Reb Moshe Feinstein, the great Pesach, and he was not known to be tall, but people stood in awe of his height. So height's not always height. But anyways,
right.
Back. So it's presence and it's, all right, but let's just cover this. So my question to Rabbi Nachum was, why does Rashi stop at 7 amos? Why doesn't Rashi say 6 amos or 5 amos? And the simple answer is from Rashi himself, because any shorter than that, you're gonna have the Aron dragging on the floor. Unless you rely on a medrash that says that the Aron carried the Levium, and so maybe their feet didn't even reach the floor. So there's different. I'm not going to claim to have given you the full picture, but now you understand why there are different medrashim and different attempts to figure this all out. Because based on the Mizbeach being 10 amos tall, and based on this principle, the understanding that the poles were located approximately in the upper third, it's going to explain why something's going to have to happen. Either the Levium are incredibly tall, or the Mizbeach carried the Levium, or something else of that sort. But let's go. Let's just see this answer. Alternatively, it's not about the height of the Mizbeach. Rather, it's about the height of the Aron. Because the Levium also carried the Aron. The Aron was not so tall. Aron Tisha v'Kaporos Tefach. The Aron was 9 tefachim tall, and along with the Kaporos, the rim that was on it, it was an additional, or here he calls it the ark cover. 10 tefachim. Harikana Sarah, we have 10 tefachim. We know that whenever you carry something with a pole, and by the way, from the Bible, we know that there was a lot of carrying with poles. The spies carried the fruits with mites, right? And the tilta milael, tre tilta milra. We know always you have 1/3 above, 2/3 below. So it turns out that the Mizbeach was entirely, sorry, not the Mizbeach, the Aron was entirely it was suspended in the air because the Levium, even if they were normal height and they carried it, so you have 7 tefachim lower than their body, it was still a good bit more than 10 tefachim above the ground. So Gemara says, why don't we just learn from Moshe? Why don't we just, if the Levium aren't 10 amos tall, so let's just have Moshe. So the Gemara answers, Dilma Moshe shiny. Maybe Moshe is different. Rashi, Ashkechan Dilamalam Yudkai, Tuva, a lot. Even if the height of Levim was only 3 amos, normal height. K'moinu, the way we are today. Hariyud ches tfachim, their height would then still be 18 tfachim. The Aron ain't tolim alamata mikisem elavav tfachim, and the Aron would only go dip 6 tfachim lower than their shoulders. So first of all, we have from Rashi over here the understanding that the common person's height is closer to 3 amos. And yet it would still be a problem. Now, I don't know if Rashi's saying that Rashi's era was that height, or the folks of the Gemara were that height, or maybe even Rashi's saying we can comfortably assume that the Jews of the desert were that height. the Gemara says we can still rely on Moshe's height to infer. Moshe was involved. Rashi, Sheperish Hamishkan, V'nimsa the Gevoyhan Shalavim Asher Amis, V'neil from Levi, Levim Noisim Mizbeach. So the Gemara goes back and says, come on, maybe we should assume that Moshe's height was 10 Amis, and the other Levim were 2. And what? So the Gemara answers, Dilma Moshe shining. Maybe Moshe's height was not a tribal feature. Maybe there was something special about Moshe. Hashem set things up. The Amar Mar. In Ashchina Shoira Ella Al Chacham Gibor Va'asher Bal Kaima. Maybe Hashem orchestrated that Moshe should be uniquely tall because the Shechina only rests on a wise, strong, wealthy, meaning unsusceptible to external influences, and a person of stature. And so Moshe, to receive the Torah, to do all the things that Moshe did, perhaps he uniquely needed to have special height. But other than that, we should not assume that all the Levim had that height. We'll take a look at Taisus later. Let's just look at the Ben Yoyada. Take a look. The Ben Yoyada asks a question. We'll close with this that I think all of us are wondering. Everyone knows the question, he says. Okay, to interact with the divine, you need to be particularly wise, insightful, and worthy. Aval Gibar, what does strength have to do with it? V'asher, riches, wealth. Since when is wealth a spiritual virtue? Ubal Koima, height. Does the Shechina, does Hashem, God forbid, discriminate against height? Is he taken by height? Why are these necessary components for prophecy? Here's what I think. In truth, what is needed is humility. Hashem only sends his prophetic messages to a short person. I'm sorry, a humble person. Hashem only extends prophecy to a humble person. Then he says we're going to find some Kabbalistic and Gematria remez. Anav, humble. Asher v'ayin b'shem shel v'yasahu shem sag. Okay, this is Kabbalah. Ach anav amiti. What is a true anav? Who is a person that's truly humble? Check this out. A person who is granted by the grace of God features that normal humans usually can't but be full of pride. And when a person has all of the societal aspects that cause a person typically to be haughty and to lose touch with their own inner humility and humanity, this person, a person that has all of the things that should get to his head and it doesn't, that's an anav. A person who's lacking societally accepted virtues is less praiseworthy that he's humble. A person that's humble because there's nothing to be proud about is not as virtuous as a person who is humble because he doesn't let all of those things get to his head. Therefore, ideally, a prophet has all of these societal virtues. So his Yetzer Hara pushes him to really let it get to his head. And then when he remains humble, so basically, ironically, we're saying a Navi needs to go through a strong, serious test. What's the greatest test to a person's humility? That they should have all the virtues which people typically associate and experience haughtiness. People that have virtue aspects and features that allow them to have influence, and yet they remain humble. This is true virtue. This is true humility. What an interesting vart and an interesting way to end off. So in a nutshell, today's Gemara was about identifying what exactly did the carrying of the sons of Kahas have to do with teaching us about the height of carrying something above 10 tvachim. Initially, one way was to infer from Moshe's height, the Levite's height. We know the height of the Mizbeach, and therefore we know the Mizbeach was being carried above 10 tvachim. As a matter of fact, it was being carried multiple amas off the ground. Alternatively, for those that don't like the presumption that all of the Levites were 10 amas high, well, then we could still refer and take a look at the Aron. The Aron was 10 tvachim tall, and it was carried at a person around the shoulder level, 2/3 below, and yet that remains significantly higher than 10 tvachim. And then we had a nice little vart at the end who says that Moshe needs to be tall? Why did Hashem make Moshe tall? And a vart that says that true humility is a person that has all of the things that might let a person get to his head, and they remain humble nonetheless. My dear friends, I want to wish you a wonderful,
Rabbi,
wonderful. Yes, sir, Beryl.
There's a great quote from Golda Meir, who once said to somebody, "There's no need to be humble. You're not that great."
So that's exactly the other side of the coin of this vart. Yes. Shkoyach Beryl. My dear friends, have a good Shabbos. Do me a
Good
favor.
Shabbos.
Do me a favor. I need to put an update on the group about Sunday's share, not because of anything that's happening, but because there's a kids program in Shul. And so I just need to make sure that that's going to be compatible with the Gemara. So I don't want to cancel it right now. Bli Neder, I'll put a post and inform you about that, just pending on the scheduling. If there's a schedule conflict with the children's program on the 7th and Hanukkah, dear friends, Freilich and Hanukkah Sameach. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Oh, this is a big Shabbos because we have 3 Torahs and 3 different special items to commemorate. It is Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah. It's one of those trivia Shabbosim. And so we should see triple blessings for everyone. And good Shabbos. Thank you all for coming on this Erev Shabbos and Hanukkah. Doctor, there's not going to be Chumash today.
How long do those long candles in the kit last? So will they make it the hour and a half?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Use Shabbos candles like I usually do.
Better to use, if you can, better to use those Shabbos candles that are thick and certainly will last, or oil if you have it.
I don't have much luck with oil.
Dr. Hammer, I can't but help think about you whenever I light my menorah and I have those little oil packaged cups. I think of you in our conversation long ago about those the prepackaged oil cups. Anyways, have a wonderful Shabbos. Thank you all. And be well.
Bernie, how far away are you?
I'm in Hollywood.